This ruling by the European Court of Human Rights, it's important to note, is a temporary one. It's an interim one. What happens next? What happens in 4 weeks in July?
So in 4 weeks' time, a British court is going to make a decision on some really difficult, meaty issues around whether this Rwanda scheme complies with international law, complies with the Refugee Convention, complies with domestic law as well. Probably the case is going to last a few days. Probably even once it's decided, that won't necessarily be the end of things, because there may well be onward appeals. And as you say, Zain, the decision from the European Court of Human Rights was just a sort of interim one. It was just about where those who are being affected by this should live while they're waiting for the outcome. Should they have to be removed to Rwanda and stay there and then be brought back to the UK if they later succeed, or should they stay in the UK pending a final outcome? UK judges had ruled they should be removed to Rwanda, which quite a lot of us were quite surprised by, quite frankly. And then eventually, European judge ruled that actually they should stay in the UK.
And sort of some of these legal challenges have focused on one Iraqi man that was set to be aboard this flight. Do we know, based on some of the legal challenges, and I guess I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball here, but based on what might happen in July, do we know which sort of asylum seekers will be allowed to remain in the UK versus which kind of asylum seekers will actually end up being sent potentially to Kigali?
It's a really interesting question, because the scope of the deal between the UK and Rwanda is really broad. So there's this, they're calling it a memorandum of understanding. It's not a treaty as such. It's got no formal legal value. It's a kind of political agreement. And it applies potentially to all asylum seekers in the UK. So anybody who claims asylum in the UK could, under the deal, potentially be eligible to be removed to Rwanda. But we're receiving about 35 to 40,000 asylum seekers per year here in the UK. Rwanda has said they'll only accept a few hundred. So somehow the UK government has to limit the numbers and pick a few. There's obviously a risk of discrimination where you go about doing that sort of thing. But what the UK government has said is that they're going to focus on people who've undertaken dangerous and illegal journeys. So basically people who get into small boats to cross the channel or into the back of a lorry, and those are the people who are facing removal. But it's also, I think it's important to understand, I'm using the word asylum seeker, you're using the word asylum seeker, we're actually talking about refugees. So they haven't been formally recognised as refugees at the point at which they're bundled onto the plane to Rwanda with a one-way ticket, basically. But if they had their claims decided here in the UK, the vast majority of them would actually get that formal recognition. They are refugees, the majority of them. We get about 75% of initial decisions here in the UK are positive. So about 75% of people get a positive grant of asylum from the Home Office, and then a further half of the people who appeal go on to win their appeal. And the stats are even higher for some nationalities, like Syrians. It's 98% of them get asylum from the Home Office, but they're still facing removal to Rwanda.
I mean, it's incredible what potentially could happen. Obviously, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen until July. We'll have to wait and see. But you've argued before Parliament that this policy may indeed violate the Refugee Convention by chain refoulement. Just explain to our audience what you mean by that.
So the Refugee Convention, it prevents a state from sending somebody back either directly or indirectly to the country that they came from if there's a risk of persecution there. And the fear is that these are overwhelmingly genuine refugees. So say, for example, the Iraqi man you mentioned earlier, there were Syrians, there were Iranians, there were Afghans. They've all got a really good chance of getting asylum if their claims are decided here in the UK. They get put on a flight to Rwanda. With the greatest of respect to the Rwandans who operate the asylum system there, it's fairly rudimentary as I understand things. There's no entitlement to legal representation. They don't seem to have interpreters for some of the relevant countries. And so the fear is that they won't stand a very good chance of getting asylum in Rwanda, and then they'd be removed by Rwanda back to their home country where they might well face persecution. So that would be an example of what we call chain refoulement, where somebody gets sent back to one country and then from that country wrongly gets sent back to their original country they fled from.
Right, and that was your point in terms of how you argued before Parliament that this violates or would violate the Refugee Convention. If the government had waited, they could have sort of waited through July and ended up changing the law. Why were they in such a rush to implement this as quickly as possible?
That's a question I can't answer, I'm afraid. So a lot of it, again, I've used the phrase we were surprised by some of the developments. Again, I was quite surprised to see the government bringing forward this flight to this month, when they've made a great big fuss of passing this new piece of legislation called the Nationality and Borders Act, in order to, with one of the bits of that, one of the sections of that act is all about removing people to safe third countries and under this kind of arrangement. And yet the government is only bringing it into force from late July. So why they couldn't wait until late July is a bit of a mystery. Instead, they're relying on legislation from 2004, which may work or may not work, and ultimately a judge will have to decide. But it did seem quite surprising that they were in such a rush to do this, even though they've got this legislation about to come into force that would probably make things easier for them.
Yeah, so many questions, and a lot of questions about why Rwanda was specifically chosen as the partner of choice for this as well. Colin, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Sports and politics collided last weekend at the inaugural Live Golf tournament backed by Saudi Arabia. The families of 9/11 victims scolded the golfers who participated in the controversial and lucrative golf series. They say it illuminates a larger issue, using a sporting event to improve a tarnished reputation, also called sports washing. Don Riddell has more.
Sport is exciting and fun. It can make you feel good. It's big business too, and governments know that investing in sports events and even teams can make them look good. There's a word for that: sports washing. Macmillan describes it as when a corrupt or tyrannical regime uses sport to enhance its reputation. Think of a sports event as a laundromat, where countries can clean up a dirty record of human rights abuse. In the last few years, Saudi Arabia has pumped billions of dollars into sport as a way to enhance its reputation. They've invested in boxing, motorsport, and horse racing. They've bought the Premier League football team, Newcastle United, and now they have the highly controversial Live Golf Series. The kingdom is trying to present a softer side. They'd rather we didn't talk about their role in the war in Yemen and the brutal murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi by Saudi agents. And the handsomely paid athletes seem happy to go along with it.
We're not politicians, we're professional golfers. And, if Saudi Arabia wanted to use the game of golf as a way for them to get to where they want to be, and they have the resources to accelerate that experience, I think we're proud to help them on that journey.
The word sports washing gained popularity in 2015 when the Sports for Rights campaign group tried to call attention to Azerbaijan's hosting of the European Games as an attempt to gloss over its controversial record on human rights. But the idea is far from original. Adolf Hitler tried it in 1936 when Nazi Germany hosted the Berlin Olympics, just 3 years before starting World War II. In more recent times, you could point to Russia's hosting of the Winter Olympics and the World Cup, while China's hosting of the Summer Games in 2008 and the 22 Winter Games were attempts to present themselves as free and fair. Both countries have controversial records in the human rights arena. Middle Eastern countries are increasingly turning to sports investment. Qatar just hosted the World Athletics Championship and will stage the FIFA World Cup in November, while Sheikh Mansour of United Arab Emirates has turned Manchester City into one of the most successful football teams in the world. As a result, some of City's fans might now be more forgiving of the UAE's restrictive approach to civil liberties. Many countries use soft power as a means of leveraging influence on the world stage, and sport is just another tool. But nobody can prove that sports washing is 100% perfect, and arguably investing in such major events could actually lead to more scrutiny than a corrupt regime would prefer. And in any case, who gets to decide who's good and who's bad? Many governments use sporting success to promote themselves internationally, and with the documented rise of nationalism around the world, is anybody really perfect anymore? Don Riddell, CNN.
See, that's what they would like for us to believe, that we don't know the difference between good and evil, that we don't know the difference between right and wrong. That's what
Promote themselves internationally.
These international countries would like to persuade the rest of the world that we are on board with the rest of the world, pertaining to the Western world, pertaining to them being humanitarian people, giving their citizens the right to choose the same as Americans, which can be furthest from the truth pertaining to the Saudi Arabia government, because to this day they still have very, very strict policies against the Christian society over there. To this day, they still do not formally let people have the same type of freedoms with the women and etc. as they do over here in America. And of course, you can look at other countries like Afghanistan that refuses to let women have any type of rights pertaining to being able to speak out, etc., etc., etc. So basically, what these countries are doing, they're weaponizing these items towards trying to hope that somehow or another they'll be able to strategize some sort of a stronghold in the eyes of society towards being more acceptable. Okay? Last night I bumped into an individual that I've went to school with almost all my life, that I was raised up with since I can remember. And he brought up the fact about, well, you never know whenever you're talking to somebody of whether or not they're a serial killer, a suicide serial killer, or a massive killer towards somebody out here wanting to kill people. You know, that's the part that the Christian society has failed in here in America. And I realize that I scrutinize the so-called churches here in America, just like I scrutinize the politics and I scrutinize other countries pertaining to them doing what they're doing. I realize that. And I realize that in a lot of people's eyes, it kind of looks like the bad news barrier. They don't want to hear it. Most people don't want to see their failures or have nobody to point out their failures, even though they know that they failed. But I just got through talking to this individual that I talked to last night, to his father a while ago, expressing how come his son would have brought up something about mass murders or insensitive suicidal serial killers. And of course, he spoke up and said, I don't know why that he would have said that. I said, well, it kind of made me feel kind of strange, or made me kind of feel kind of uncomfortable by him bringing up those things, because obviously he must have talked to somebody to have ever brought that up to begin with in the conversation of me and him. I do want to say that Ricky, that I'm going to go ahead and use his first name, Ricky, that I went to school with, remembered an incident that happened in Westview in the sophomore year pertaining to a black guy that had pulled a knife on me and him both. And a few days later, I wound up having a rumble with this individual that, like I say, I had forgotten about. And I got him on the floor, and I was working him over, and he begged off towards, don't hit me, please don't hit me no more. And about that time, 4 or 5 other of his constituents was surrounding the ordeal. And as soon as I got him off, that's whenever all 5 or 6 of them jumped me at the same time, and I had to wind up ushering out the bathroom locker room door there in Westview to keep from getting bombarded by everybody, getting pounced on by everybody. And I said something to Ricky. I said, you know, Ricky, I go, those people stick together, just like the Mexicans. And I go, other cultures stick together. I go, one of the main issues, the reason why that we have failed as a society over here in America, especially a church society, is because we didn't stick together. And whenever it comes to being some sort of a murder, even while I asked his father a while ago, what did he think about wickedness and sin and evil? And he said that he wished that it was abolished. And I said, well, any good, true Christian is going to wish the same thing. They're going to wish that murders is abolished. They're going to wish that rapes is abolished. They're going to wish that stealing and lying is abolished. They're going to wish that murder is abolished. They're going to wish that war is abolished. Any good, true Christian is going to wish these things. So does that make us, not just me, but does that make us mass murderers because we want to see the eradication of the very axis of evil come to its end? You see, this is where the war began back thousands of years ago. Good versus evil, evil versus good. And of course, if you're demonic, you're wicked, you're evil, you're going to wish that the Christian society has died off. And at the same time, if you're godly and righteous, you're going to wish the very same thing. Not so much of those that haven't committed a crime that deserve this type of punishment, but of those that do. Now, by and large, what do we wish for the wicked society? We wish for them to surrender their hearts and lives over to Christ, and them to have a completely total turnover in their lives. That's what we wish. But if you're going to be evilly minded, and if you're going to commit all these heinous crimes pertaining to the acts of violence, we wish that you got the type of punishment that deservedly you deserve. That was the point that I was trying to make on the picture that I put out in regards to all this, that the devil's people want to make sure that God's people is crucified, but whenever it comes time for God's people to make sure that the devil's people are crucified, that's whenever they raise a flag and start saying, oh, you can't judge us, you can't do this. You know, even Jesus said that the sinners love sinners, and what thank have we, because they even give exchange of gifts to one another. So the wicked is going to protect the wicked. The powerful and the wicked are going to continue to protect those who are lawbreakers, are committing such act of violence that they deserve a harsh crime, a punishment for their crime, but they don't get it because the very people that put this crime in play are the very people now that's lenient on their own people. Wow. What's more, if we're going to survive as a Christian society, we are going to have to engage in putting aside a great deal of these trivial problems, and we're going to have to focus more on becoming united rather than divided. Thanks again for listening. Good luck to all of us as we end our program by saying shalom. God bless America, and God bless our troops, and God bless.